program director for Lanphear Live, and those of you that have followed for the last 5 years know her amazing ability to find perfect programming. It's always a great mix of things, and tonight is not going to let you down. We've got a great one tonight, so thank you so much, Janice. The next people I'd like to thank is our executive director, Jocelyn Leahy, and her crew who are in charge of hospitality, and they are working like crazy back there, so please help yourself to refreshments. There's light refreshments and some kind of movie coordinated snacks to participate in, exactly, some good popcorn. And then I also want to thank our Napatrice manager, Daniel Cole, who I think is around here. He's running some tech for us tonight and can help you with any sort of seating things, other things that you're running into. Just raise your hand about that. And then I have to offer a huge thank you to our generous community programming sponsors. You can see them all up here on the board, but I'd like to go through them with you. We couldn't do this without them. It's with their support that we can keep this open as a public meeting space free of charge for the events that the Conservancy is offering. And our sponsors are Parsons Kellogg, Olympia Tea Room, WH2O, Garceau Brewery, Michelli's Furniture, the Bob Valenti family of dealerships, Hammond Housecraft, Watch Hill Garage, Randall Realtors Compass, the Alfred M. Roberts Jr. Charitable Foundation, who is so generous with the Conservancy. Thank you so much. Anonymous, in memory of our Watch Hill Conservancy founders, Chap Barnes and Fred Whittemore, Mary Ann and Brian Thompson, and the Lamb family. So if you are interested in sponsoring our programming, please reach out to the office. We'd be thrilled to include you on our list. Tonight, I'm so excited to present this program to you. In spring of 2018, Betty Jo Cugini, principal of Weather Vane Communications, approached me with a fabulous idea that she'd been noodling on for a while. She wanted to create a trilogy, 3 half-hour films focused on area history, and she wanted those to be able to be available locally, regionally, and nationally to share our beautiful history. She already had the support of the Westerly Library, Rhode Island PBS, and the Westerly Historical Society. So it made my presentation to the Conservancy board quite easy, and the board was in with 2 feet. We couldn't be more excited to support this film trilogy. Then our golden pens that are on the Conservancy team went to work, and we were able to obtain a grant from the Rhode Island Foundation, in particular from the Herman H. Rose Cultural, Civic, and Media Access Fund. And they provided a wonderful nugget of money that really helped sort of push us over the line. And Betty, Jo, and Jim were off to work on the project late 18, early 19. And then COVID hit. And, provided all the challenges that COVID provided everybody and everything. But here we are today with a great film that I'm so excited to share with you. And I'm particularly excited because here we are in the Chaplain Barnes Reading Room, a fantastic historic restoration on Bay Street, to look at a film about the history of commercial use and all kinds of stuff happening on Bay Street. So it's just couldn't be a better place to do what we're about to do tonight. So enough of my rambling on. I'd like to introduce my colleague and friend and the president of the Watch Hill Conservancy, Dr. Peter August.
Thank you, Deborah. Now I can ramble on. Now, are you getting that showcase cinema vibe tonight? The wafting smells of the popcorn, the candy in the back that's guaranteed to pull out a couple of fillings. Deborah, this is a good cop, bad cop thing, because Deborah asked me to remind you that when we dim the lights and the movie starts, there'll be no smooching with your date in the back of the theater here. So It's my absolute pleasure.
That wasn't mine. I said I took off your cell phone.
Okay. I took a little editorial license on that one. It's my pleasure to introduce our three speakers tonight. This is the first premiere showing of Where the River Meets the Sea, Bay Street. Betty Jo Cugini and Jim Karpeichik are very well known in Rhode Island. Their portfolio includes a number of really terrific historic documentaries, especially of this area. Watch Hill, Portrait of a New England Seaside Village, Saving One Bay Street, The Flying Horse Carousel in Watch Hill. They're doing the community and all of us a fantastic service by memorializing our past and being able to share it in the future. Betty Jo is a supervisor of new media at the University of Rhode Island. She's also an associate professor of journalism at Emerson College and the owner of Weather Vane Communications, which provides media training, video storytelling, and management consulting services. Betty Jo has had a long and distinguished career in journalism. She was the news director and vice president of news at NBC 10 WJAR. Her team was awarded a National Edward R. Murrow Award for excellence in news broadcasting. Jim Karpeichik, the owner of Ocean State Video, has been in the video industry for over 40 years. His work has appeared on PBS, NBC, Discovery Channel, the History Channel, CNN, and a number of national sports channels. He has 15 New England Emmy Awards and is a two-time National Press Photographers Association Region 1 Photographer of the Year. We're going to hear some concluding comments and reflections by Zachary Garceau. Zach is a historian and serves as the vice president and archivist for the Westerly Historical Society. His work has been published in many magazines and journals, as well as his first book, Great Stories from Westerly's Past. In addition to his work with the Historical Society, Zachary is also a records specialist at the Rhode Island State Archives and a part-time professional genealogist. Betty Jo and Jim will give a very brief introduction to the film. We'll show it on the big silver screen here. Then I'll have Zach come up and give his thoughts and reflections, and then we'll go into question and answer. So with that, Jim, do you want to come up and have a few introductory remarks?
How you doing, everybody? I usually make my living behind the camera, so this is a little different for me, but I made a few notes this morning to help me out. Unfortunately, what I have is my wife's shopping list because I grabbed the wrong paper leaving the house. This is the first of three films from a series that Betty Jo conceived and spearheaded called Where the River Meets the Sea, and it's Bay Street, Avondale, and Margin Street. And this is the first film, and we're thrilled to be sharing it with all of you tonight. I want to ask you a question. You know, what does an old fire truck have to do with Bay Street? And that's a question that hopefully you'll have an answer for by the end of the night, or if not, ask us later and we'll explain that. I just want to talk for a few minutes about the process of what we do when we put together a documentary like this, and then I'll give it to Betty Jo and let her make a few remarks as well. So basically, I'm just your opening act. The process is we look for the stories, and we find out what those stories are, the smaller individual stories and the bigger overall story. And we look for a way to get from the beginning to the end. What makes the beginning of the story, what makes the end of the story, and then how do we put the arc of that story together to get from the beginning to the end, and hopefully put some surprises perhaps in the middle. We try to separate fact from fiction when we're doing that, because we're talking to people, and oftentimes the stories we're talking about are stories that have been passed down through generations. And sometimes those stories get enhanced a little bit, as you might imagine. So we need to go back to photographs and documents, things that people like Zach spend a lot of time curating and use those documents and photographs to help put together what the true story is as best as we can determine that. Then we look for interviews, and we'll try to find out who we want to interview. I would imagine that we could interview just about anybody in this room and come up with little pieces of history, little stories about Bay Street, things that have happened, things that have been passed down to you and your family from those who came before you. Maybe you remember the first time you came down and saw Bay Street as a child. Maybe it's something that you heard from a grandparent or something, but you've all got stories, and so our job is to take those stories and sort of weed them through and come up with the ones that we want to include in the film. One of the first interviews we did on one of the first projects we did in Watch Hill was an interview with Chaplain Barnes, who you all know and has had so much to do with this community and preserving the legacy and history of this community. And that's an interview that we tapped into for that first piece, and we didn't even realize at the time that there would be so much great information in that interview that interview would live on and is included in a story like we're going to be showing you tonight. We want to identify and organize all of that information and then put it together. And there's a chapel you all have up on the hill, and there's a saying up there that I've read many times, that the church is many as the waves, but one as the sea. And that's essentially what we do. We take those many interviews and we try to put them into one concise story. So we'll grab interviews from different people that we've talked to, grab photographs and documents, and put that together into one piece. We'll take a look at the interviews, look at the photos, and then what we don't have from the interviews, we sort of write. That's where Betty Jo brings in all of her research, and she fills in the blanks to tell that story. And then we look for additional video that we can gather. So maybe we can find some video of something like the Watch Hill 15s racing off the coast here a few years ago. How does that video play into our storytelling, and how can we use that to advance the story we're doing? Hopefully you'll get that out of tonight's piece. And then again, I'll bring it back to finish up with that fire truck. How does that fire truck fit into the story that we're telling today? And how did we use that fire truck in that event that we filmed here as part of the story to put it all together? So with that, I'll let Betty Jo talk to you a little bit more about the how and the why.
Hello. Please excuse me, I have a little bit of laryngitis. It's not COVID. It's so nice to see all of you in person tonight rather than on Zoom. I have a lot of thank yous, first of all, to the Conservancy, to Deborah Lamb, to Deborah, who you and the board really were the ones that said, go ahead and do this. As she mentioned, COVID happened. I lost my father. I broke my leg. This has been one of those projects that we just can't seem to get ahead of. But I'm happy to say that many of you in this room have helped us, and many of you will be in the Avondale piece, and many of you will be in Margin Street as well. So I thank all of you for sharing your stories with us. I also want to thank the Roberts Foundation and the Ocean Community Chamber of Commerce. I think Lisa Kanicki is here with us today. And thank you for all of your support and your encouragement. A lot of research has gone into these three parts. And each time I turn a corner, I think that I'm coming to the end, and I find somebody to speak about something, and they take me down another street, another avenue. And I really like that, but at some point you have to finish things and you have to put them aside. So I'm at the point where we've identified the last couple of people we have to interview, and then we're going to put this project to bed. So I promise you next summer when you come, you can see the next two parts. These are for education and for entertainment purposes. Jim and I have worked with the Conservancy, the Royce Family Fund, the Lighthouse Foundation, Lighthouse Keepers Foundation, and other people who just love Watch Hill as much as I do. Tonight you'll hear from two people who are no longer with us. And that really solidifies the reason that we have to get these interviews and we have to keep these stories going. One of them is Jane Hoxie Maxon. You really enjoy her stories. The other one, the wonderful Chaplain Bradford Barnes. And thanks to Chap for standing here tonight, right? So Watch Hill through time. Chap said to me, before I leave, as he always would say to me, before I leave, I'd like to make a movie. So I said, well, what would you like to do? And he said, I'd like to tell the story and make my book come to life. So that's really where this all started. So I have to say a very great thank you to our friend Chaplain Barnes, and of course to Fred Whittemore, who also was very gracious and helped us. We lost David McCullough today. He was another cherished voice that's now silenced. I encourage all of you to please grab his books, read them, just hold on to them tight, because those voices, as they leave us and they're silenced, that's a big part of our history. So please, tonight, make sure that you all think about the stories that you want to tell. Even if your grandchildren and your children have one of those iPhones and you're sitting at dinner and you say, please don't film me, please don't do that. Use the voice memo. I do that with my mother all the time, and just record those stories, because when they're gone, and we need to be able to share those to the next generation. You may wonder tonight why certain places are not in Bay Street. You may wonder why certain people are not mentioned in Bay Street. As was mentioned earlier, these 3 pieces are done for Rhode Island PBS, and 26 minutes goes by very quickly. So it's not that you didn't have interesting tales to tell, and it's not that they're not important, but if I leave something out, it means I have to do another one, right? That's how I look at it. So tonight, make sure that you enjoy the old photographs. Zach Garceau and the Westerly Historical Society were really intricate in this, as were many of you. This story is about the photographs. It's about the stories that are going to be told. So please enjoy.
The state of Rhode Island was settled in large part due to its proximity to water, the ocean, an abundance of safe harbors, and the rivers that feed into them. In the southern part of the state, no waterway is more influential than the Pawcatuck River. Just after 5 o'clock on the afternoon of October 18, 1916, a watchman at the new Watch Hill House discovered a fire in the East Wing. The Watch Hill Fire Department responded immediately and quickly realized that they would need assistance from all available departments in the region.
There was a strong southeastern breeze that was blowing. Some say it was 40 knots, and it just took off.
According to the Westerly Sun, the fire burned for almost 4 hours, and by the time it was under control, 3 landmark hotels and a couple of cottages were either damaged or destroyed.
The 1916 fire was before they had any fire equipment, and it started in one of the hotels, and they all went up like tinder.
And it was put out because the front end of the storm was the wind, but the real part of the storm was the rain. So the rain came down and extinguished it.
Sunrise the next morning revealed a landscape that would never be the same again. Many of the iconic buildings up the hill from Bay Street were gone. But something else changed that day: the community. For one thing, the residents of Watch Hill realized they needed to improve their local fire service. Within a year, they would purchase a new fire truck, a pumper named Alfie. It would serve the community into the 1950s. Watch Hill sits above Little Narragansett Bay, where the Pawcatuck River meets the sea. And at the heart of this resort community is Bay Street. In the first half of the 19th century, Watch Hill and Bay Street were entering a new phase, moving from farmlands to a resort community. The first person that influenced this new type of community was Watch Hill's original lighthouse keeper, Jonathan Nash. who housed overnight guests at the lighthouse.
The Jonathan Nash, the first lighthouse keeper in 1808, made extra money by taking people on fishing expeditions, fishing and selling fish, and also boarding people. Then the lighthouse establishment really thought that was a bad idea, and in 1833 he opened up his first hotel, the Watch Hill House.
I think Nash is fondly remembered, perhaps somewhat infamous for beginning the hotel business here. Newport, Rhode Island was the target location for people coming to Rhode Island to summer, as it were. But Nash saw opportunity here.
The Nash family inspired community growth and set the stage for other families to open up rooming houses and larger hotels like Plimpton House and Atlantic House.
At that time, the hotels in Watch Hill were the premier attraction.
Travelers who rented hotel rooms by the week or month became steady visitors to Watch Hill and eventually wanted to stay for the summer season. This, coupled with fewer hotel rooms after the Great Fire, led the shift from hotels to cottages.
The great change occurred in 1881-82 when a group from Cincinnati, who had been coming to Watch Hill to the hotels, were able to find farmland, a substantial tract of farmland around the hotels.
And they purchased a lot of the land and built a lot of the buildings that were there for a time and actually are still there today.
Once the people from the Midwest especially realized that fresh air and salt water were good for their health, they wanted to come to the Atlantic Ocean, and Watch Hill seemed to be the place.
And people started as early as 1886 actually building what they called cottages.
And so Watch Hill slowly went from being a place that was known as a watering place with fashionable hotels and day trippers to a cottage colony.
And that transformation does affect Bay Street enormously, I think.
In the early days, Bay Street was a hub of activity that supported a growing number of visitors and served as a transportation center.
It was a dirt road up until probably the 1890s. There were commercial development along that road, along the harbor front, that was just built by local entrepreneurs to service the hotel crowd. But on the harbor side, the back ends were out in the harbor on stilts.
If you walked along the shoreline back in the 1880s, there would be 17 steamboat landings here a day. There was a steamboat dock right next to the yacht club, and all along the shoreline here were shacks. And towards the yacht club was the Larkin Shore Dinner, which was famous for people to come to.
They definitely came to Watch Hill by water more than they did by wagon or carriage.
A lot of the steamboats that were coming up and down the river at the time, and even a lot of the schooners coming in and out of the Pawcatuck River, there was a large amount that was recreation related, bringing tourists and goods.
You'd see horse and buggies going back here, people riding bicycles. Bicycle was in fashion at that time period, and lots of boating. And people were dressed in, Victorian age wear.
Larger steamships came in from New York, Boston, and New London to drop off visitors. The smaller docks allowed ships coming up and down the Pawcatuck River to drop off local passengers and supplies. The local steamers, Watch Hill and the Westerly, would pull into Bay Street daily, ferrying passengers to and from the train station in Stonington and from downtown Westerly. At the height of the season, as many as 17 round trips were reportedly made to Watch Hill each day, ferrying workers and visitors.
Watch Hill was a place where boats would come and go on a regular basis to pick up and drop off people who were headed, let's say, to Block Island. Or if you were from Westerly and needed to get to a place further south, such as New London, you could take a boat out out of downtown Westerly, get off in Watch Hill, and pick up another craft and head off into New London, for example. And these New London boats would have stops scheduled in Mystic, Stonington, and other places along the way, Groton, for example.
Visitors were greeted by the small shops that dotted the street, offering everything from shore apparel to ice cream and even a movie theater.
There were a number of houses, small commercial ventures, a post office and different things that ran along the water's edge. And so the view actually was kind of blocked.
The Columbia House had a big front porch where Spiro kept his corn popper, which was the best corn popcorn I've ever had. And they sold Barber's ice cream.
The cottagers came for long periods of time during the summer, and early on they would have wanted all of those services that they had at home nearby. And they existed here. There was a fishmonger, there was a grocery store, there were fresh produce was available on the street.
Maybe people didn't shop the same way, but I think that there was definitely a thriving sense of activity. There was a certain amount of buzz.
Imagine hundreds of people arriving here and being extremely busy, and a lot of them were day trippers. So Bay Street was really kind of a happening place.
Bay Street serves as a main road into the village of Watch Hill, anchored by the Lanphear livery at one end and the treasured merry-go-round at the other.
The livery was the hub of activity, especially for a certain level of folks that, you know, their lives evolved around the carriages and now the automobiles or what have you. So there was definitely, everybody came here to check in to see what was going on in town, who was coming, who was going.
The chauffeurs that didn't have garages kept their owners' cars, and usually you could find 2 or 3 chauffeurs sitting in there chatting.
At the other end of Bay Street was another spot where people would gather socially, the merry-go-round.
It's such an important part of the experience of Watch Hill, especially obviously for young people.
In 1883, a traveling carnival set up at the north end of Bay Street, complete with games and rides, including a merry-go-round. According to local folklore, the flying horses housed under a canvas tent were left behind when the carnival moved on. The merry-go-round has been on Bay Street ever since.
It's an iconic feature of Watch Hill.
We have the original horses on it. They go on every year and are used throughout the summer season, and they're meticulously taken care of.
The only thing that has changed over the years is its location. It now sits at the south end of Bay Street in front of the beach and continues to be a main attraction for people of all ages. The merry-go-round helped to define Bay Street as the Midway, as it was once called, because of its carnival-like atmosphere and live entertainment. It was not uncommon to see ladies and gentlemen strolling along in their Sunday best, on their way to get a drink or see a show. Jane Hoxie Maxson recalls her father, Porter Hoxie, playing the piano at the theater on Bay Street.
My father played for the silent movies. He needed a musician, and he played the piano at the little theater at Watch Hill. And my mother was there one night and was absolutely thrilled to see Douglas Fairbanks Jr.
As Bay Street evolved and changed over the years, so too did the means of transportation by which visitors arrived.
The downfall of the steamships really came when trolleys started coming to Westerly.
Around the turn of the century, 1907, you had the trolley coming in.
And at the end of most trolley systems, there was a merry-go-round, which was the driving force of the trolley companies to have people motivated to get on, buy a ticket, and go to the merry-go-round.
The trolley line extended for 6 miles from Westerly to Watch Hill so it would bring summer visitors from the Westerly train station to the village.
I think it was sort of a way for Bay Street to attract a greater crowd of people who were coming to the region because they could get to the trolley system. I think that brought people down to the seaside to enjoy the sea and to walk, to promenade, to walk along the harbor.
There were many things to do along Bay Street during the summer months. Renting a boat along the docks and taking a leisurely sail or boat ride was a popular way to cool off. Eating at the famous shore dinner hall was always a treat. As the seasons went by, many of the shacks along the waterfront started to fall into disrepair. Changes needed to be made. The Watch Hill Improvement Society was formed, first by the men, but quickly taken over by the women, who believed a more concerted effort was needed to oversee the look of the village and Bay Street.
The Watch Hill Improvement Society started in the late 1800s.
And they begin to think very carefully about the look of the street and how it appeals to summer or holiday residents who are here for more than a week or so. And the first thing they do is they create a clearance or redevelopment project. These buildings, small, what were called shacks actually on the waterfront, are removed over a period of 10 years, from 1910 to 1920. And it's really quite a dramatic change. Once they're removed, there's a view of this incredible harbor that they had not had from Bay Street. And an effort is made to hire a noted landscape architect, Marion Kruger Coffin, to design a park along the waterfront.
Kruger Coffin was a noted landscape architect who fell in love with the area. She even purchased a summer home in Watch Hill and did other work in Westerly. Designs for the Watch Hill Village Park, also known as Harbor Park, were completed in 1936 and included plantings, walkways, statues, and small trees, so as not to obstruct the views of the bay.
The Village Park in Watch Hill plays a really great role. First of all, as people drive in, they can see the harbor and the water right away, which you can't always do in some communities. We don't have tall trees in the Village Park. We have hydrangeas, a beautiful gazebo, a statue of Chief Ninigret, and a statue at the other end of the Dreamer. And it's a nice, flat, long area where people can walk and they can sit on the seawall, watch the sunset, which so many people do, hear a concert. It's a very pleasant place.
Bay Street was a place to be and be seen. The local summer paper, the Seaside Topics, carried all of the social news, including the comings and goings in the summer colony, the clubs, the hotels and social events held in the large homes leading down Fort Road to Napatree Point.
Sundays were Sunday dinner with Grandma. Every Sunday, a big roast and all the goodies, mashed potatoes, and always Grandma's chocolate pudding made from scratch.
Summer residents enjoyed using the harbor for recreation, including small sailboats. In 1922, residents built the Watch Hill Yacht Club.
Right out here, there would be a floating dock, and on that floating dock would be a bunch of small boats that people could come down and rent for the day. And then there would be lined up on both this dock and the Watch Hill dock, there would be catboats, which were called party boats, and they would take out maybe 20 or 30 people. Today we take out a maximum of 6. And they would go out and they would sail out, and they would have a picnic perhaps on Pawcatuck Point or Osbrook Point.
1938 ushered in changes to Bay Street that no one expected and no one could control. It began in February, when another great fire swept through the village, destroying everything in its path.
Where the system block is, a group of 8 buildings is taken away by fire just to the south of the Olympia Tea Room.
I do remember the 1938 fire because my mother and I looked out the window and we could see the reflection of the flames from the hill in Pawcatuck.
Jane Hoxie Maxon's grandfather was the fire chief at the time of the historic fire and chronicled the aftermath. The Sisson block included clothing shops, a restaurant, and guest rooms, all built on land that was purchased by Harriet Sisson. The summer businesses were popular with residents and tourists alike. Once again, the ashes would have to be cleared away. In the months that followed, the Sisson family would rebuild the stores and guest rooms. Residents would say the summer of '38 was a hot one that lingered into September. Then, with little or no warning, a hurricane came barreling up the East Coast, taking aim at Watch Hill. That storm would change the lives and character of the community forever.
I was in 7th grade, and our 7th grade teacher told us, she traced it on the map. It's going out to sea. You know, it's going along the coast. We're not going to get much from it until the windows started being splattered with leaves. And, you know, it was raining hard. Finally, the principal had all the kids move from their classrooms into the corridors. And that's where they spent the hurricane.
Over on Napatree Point, houses along Fort Road were destroyed and washed away.
15 people perished as their houses, numbering about 40, were lifted off of their foundations and pushed, some of them up the river and over to the Connecticut side, some straight over to Barn Island, and a few of them up almost to Stonington. It was a remarkable event, and it changed the geography here forever.
Businesses along Bay Street were heavily damaged too, along with the docks, yacht club, and fire station. Somehow, one business on Bay Street has survived, the Olympia Tea Room.
There are various parts of the building that were involved in various fires. After the fire that took the top of the Columbia House Hotel off, it was rebuilt, and that was when the Olympia Tea Room first moved in 1916. It was opened by 3 Greek brothers. It was a place where the help ate. The chauffeurs, the maids, the housekeepers from all the big houses in Watch Hill, they were the regular customers. And then, of course, all the children of the Watch Hill people would come in here for ice cream.
More than 100 years after the doors first opened, the Tea Room is still a hub of the community on Bay Street.
When you come down the river and into the harbor, the natural flow of everything is through the Olympia, right here in the middle of the street. It's always been the center. It's always in the nicest way, dominated the street and been a presence which we have tried very hard to preserve.
Generations of visitors have walked up and down Bay Street, enjoying the serenity of Watch Hill, while at the same time connecting to the past.
Bay Street is very much a place where people come and enjoy a summer holiday and all of that, what that entails. Even though it had begun as sort of a service street, within 60, 70 years has a much more unified look and has sort of reached a point in time where it's a commercial block of some significance.
Some of the businesses, like the Book and Tackle, Holdridge's Garage, and Nash and Fiore's Market, are no longer here. But the warm sunsets over Little Narragansett Bay still grace the evening skies. Homemade ice cream is still churned and sold along with popcorn at St. Clair Annex. And the livery is still a gathering place for the community. In more recent years, the appearance of Bay Street has continued to evolve.
Bay Street Improvement Project actually was the brainchild of Chap Barnes and Fred Whittemore, with the idea that the telephone wires and poles that extended along Bay Street had become complicated and unsightly. So their idea was to bury the wires and create a new, cleaner look for the street.
The biggest challenge today is climate change and how to protect Bay Street from a relatively new threat: sea level rise.
Well, sea level rise is the next huge challenge, and it's already occurring.
We're starting to experience more consistent, higher high tides.
Bay Street itself, a majority of it is about at 8 feet above sea level, and it's already in a flood hazard zone. So a storm surge of 10 feet or 12 feet can have a significant effect upon this street and the harbor front.
The highest that I've seen the water down here was Superstorm Sandy. We knew it was coming. We prepared as much as we could. We put plastic up about 4 feet all the way across the building, and then reinforced that plastic with sandbags. And the water came right to the edge of the sandbags.
In 30 years, the merry-go-round might not be in the same location because of sea level rise. But I think that with enough infrastructure, those institutions can stay there. But it will be a tough task.
Watch Hill is ground zero for the impacts of sea level rise, storm surge, and nuisance tides. The community is facing those problems head on, and it's due to the leadership of the Watch Hill Fire District and the Watch Hill Conservancy, who are pulling together the key players in the community to try to understand where we're most vulnerable, why we're vulnerable, and what we can do to mitigate and to mitigate the problems and to make ourselves as adapted as possible to meet these climate change challenges.
It's an issue the Yacht Club has already had to deal with.
Basically, within 5 years after its construction, the club realized that the decking needed to be raised up to keep from flooding at high tide, and the whole structure needed to be raised up to allow the first floor to be useful.
The Watch Hill Yacht Club still sits on Little Narragansett Bay, as it has since 1913. Today, the updated structure sits 15 feet higher to avoid damage from future storm surges. Time on the water has been a part of the fabric of life here as long as anyone can remember. Whether taking a leisurely boat ride across the bay or setting off for a competitive sail in the afternoon breeze, the cool salt air has always beckoned.
There have always been eye-catching yachts in the harbor. At the docks, now there are more of them. It's a yachting destination.
In the 1920s, they added their own racing fleet, consisting of Harrisoff sloops, known as Watch Hill 15s. It's a history that was honored in August of 2019, when a fleet of 25 fiberglass Watch Hill 15s reunited for a regatta in the waters around Napa Tree Point.
I think from the point of view of the people that own the boats now, it's important to have a celebration that this fleet is still going.
Watch Hill has always had a respect for its past. It's one of the reasons Bay Street has maintained its classic look, and why on a recent afternoon, the community gathered to reconnect with another icon from the past, Lanphear. That's right, the original fire truck that was purchased after the 1916 fire has been fully restored and has returned for a visit. Another generation is poised to stay connected with those who came before them, with a fond appreciation for Bay Street, where the river meets the sea.
Yes, and actually before I begin, can we just get one more round of applause for Betty Jo and Jim? That was fantastic last summer. That really was fantastic, so thank you so much. So as you already heard, my name is Zach Garceau, and I am the Vice President and Archivist for the Westerly Historical Society. And it's my capacity as the latter that I'm here to talk to you tonight. I've been serving as the archivist for the Society since 2016, and it is my job, and it's a job in which I find great joy. And over the last 6 years, I have assisted dozens or perhaps even hundreds of people in finding the information that they're looking for and answering any and all questions that they might have about the history of our town. While I certainly take great pleasure in being able to help those looking to learn more, I must admit that I hadn't always thought deeply about the end result of that work. And that was until I had a conversation recently with Janice and Pete about the work that I do for the Historical Society, and that really got me thinking a little bit more about what that research actually means. But before we get there, I just want to start at the beginning, and by that I mean the very beginning. The Westerly Historical Society was formed in 1913, and immediately they began collecting notable items that are important to local history. And while some might not think of meeting minutes as a historical record, the minutes from the Society's first meeting back in 1913 have been held in our archives for over a century, marking the genesis of our work. These are far from our oldest artifact, however, and although it is difficult to conclusively identify the item which is truly the oldest in our collection, we do have several records of the Rhode Island colony, as well as numerous land deeds and probate records that are known to date back to the 17th century. Because the holdings of the Society are not entirely accessioned on an item level for each collection, the exact number of objects maintained by the Society is impossible to truly identify. However, we do know that the item type which makes the most significant portion of our collection is photographs, which number in thousands in a variety of formats that include glass plates, tintypes, 35mm slides, and black and white prints. Many of these photographs have been inventoried and are easily searchable, and as you've seen in tonight's film, photographs are among the most crucial artifacts for research of a community and its history. Some of the more incredible photographic collections held by the Historical Society include never-before published images from the hurricane of 1938, portraits of many Westerly residents that date back to the mid-19th century, and even more recent photos like those from Girl Scout camps in town taken in the 1960s and 1970s. Personally, as a huge baseball fan, I know which photo might be my favorite, and it is one that is dated from about 1913 to 1915, and it shows two older men standing outside the Westerly Sun building directly underneath a manually operated scoreboard that was updated, I think every day, but actually it might even have been hourly, and it shows the scores of each game. And while the photograph isn't dated, we can surmise that it was taken about 1913 to 1915 because the games that were actually listed on there were from the Federal League, which only existed for those 3 seasons. So also important to the research, such as that which was done by Betty Jo and Jim, are the various records and books which are contained within the Society's holdings. We maintain an array of one-of-a-kind record books ranging from prescription books to police logs to hotel registers and even the records of the Watch Hill lighthouse keeper. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the land and probate records in our collection. As a genealogist, I know firsthand just how important those types of records are, as they help in establishing family connections, determining property ownership, and ultimately allow us to more clearly understand the day-to-day lives of those who came before us. In short, the collections of the Westerly Historical Society are a critical foundation for telling the story of our town. When I'm asked what I do as the archivist for the Society, I often have a hard time summarizing it in a brief description, but I think our mission statement does a great job outlining the most important aspects. According to our collections policy, the mission of the Westerly Historical Society is to research, study, and preserve local history in our community. With that in mind, I'd like to discuss those 3 actions that are referenced in that statement, and a little bit more about why they're so important for us. So the first is to preserve, and I think that that might be one of the most crucial. The importance of proper preservation of historical records cannot be overstated. If every object that is in the collection today is there when I'm gone, I will feel I've done my job. If at that time there's more than there is today, I will feel I've done an even better job. As an archivist, my goal is to ensure that everything in the custody of the society is properly stored and cataloged using materials that conform to the archival standards and to ensure that they are in a position to survive for generations to come. The next part of the mission statement that I'd like to talk about is research. Research constitutes a great many things which form the backbone of the work that we do at the Westerly Historical Society. And as the archivist, I am also somewhat of a corresponding secretary in that I respond to each and every question that comes our way. And there's a few types of questions that are fairly common that we receive. So one of which is genealogists who are working to either prove their ancestry just for fun or because they want to join a lineage society. Some are simply curious about a long-held belief in their family and want to confirm what they'd been told. And another common one is that people who know that they are descended from Westerly's early settlers and they're planning to visit the town, sometimes from several states away. A great example of this actually came up a few weeks ago when there was someone who was coming, I believe it was from New York State, and they asked about the historic cemetery number 16, the Stillman Crandall lot, which is on Potter Hill Road. They knew they were descendants of someone who was buried there, but they were unclear of how to access the cemetery and also if it was easy to locate. So having actually grown up in that area, that was a pretty easy question for me to answer. Another facet of the research element that needs to be considered is what the information we provide is actually used for. Over the last several years, I've been able to offer information that was used for genealogical research, to resolve legal questions, and even by authors who are writing books about people and places that have an association with the town of Westerly. One that always comes to mind is a history professor who was writing a book about Enid Yandell, who was a sculptor who was actually born in Kentucky and died in Boston. So her connection to Westerly might not be immediately obvious, but she is actually the one who created the Ninigret statue that's actually right down the street from here. And actually, so when we do help authors, one of the only things that we tend to ask is when the book is done to give us a copy of it so that we can actually expand our library. And by doing that, we've actually been able to get quite a few new books added and a lot of new information that we can help people find. And the final action that is a part of the Society's mission is to study. And this is yet another term that can have several distinct meanings and serves as an excellent showcase of why archives are so important. The objects we collect, maintain, and preserve allow us as a community to tell the stories like the ones that Betty Jo and Jim have so wonderfully presented here tonight. If those who came before me had not done the hard work of collecting and storing so many items diligently, inventorying each one, these stories would be much more difficult to tell. Records, photographs, and other documents also are crucial to the work of many authors, myself included, as they are the primary sources that inform historians and authors alike, allow them to share those findings with the public. While the history of Westerly over the last 350 plus years is well documented, there's so much history that has slipped through the fingers of public consciousness and is at risk of being lost forever. I cannot tell you how many times I've been flipping through a seemingly unassuming document, not expecting to find much, and stumbling upon a story that I was completely unaware of. And the last part of the mission statement that I'd like to talk about is not really an action, but I think it's actually the most important part, and that is our community. This is why preserving the history of Westerly is so important to me. It is the story of our community, of the town where many of us were born and raised, and where even more still call home today. The story of Westerly is one unlike any other, and for this reason alone, it's crucial that the artifacts of its history are properly cared for. Ultimately, the story of Westerly is the story of its people and the lives they live, and that story cannot be told without the objects, the records, the photographs that inform us of the details of that story. And I'm honored to be able to help keep that story alive. Thank you.